Imagine standing in a bank, completely broke. You are just staring at red ink on your financial ledger, and as a final, frankly, absurd act of desperation, you offer your pet cat as collateral for a loan extension.
And the banker actually accepts.
Right. The banker accepts.
Only for you to find out, basically, right after handing the animal over to the institution, that your cat can fluently speak.
Yeah, and we are not talking about like mimicry or simple phrases here. We are talking about fluent, philosophical conversation with both humans and other animals.
It's wild.
It is. Almost overnight, it becomes a global phenomenon. So today, we are diving into this remarkable short story, Collateral Cat. It's this brilliant, magical realist narrative about a man named Jude who stumbles into this exact premise with his cat, Bounce.
It is a premise that immediately forces you to question how we value the things around us. And, it brings us to a really fascinating divide in how to interpret Day's work.
Exactly. The central question we're exploring today is this. Is Collateral Cat fundamentally a psychological parable about personal accountability and the internal barriers to success, specifically fractured attention and a lack of commitment?
Or, and this is where I land, is it a broader, more systemic critique of a transactional worldview and the institutional commodification of life?
Right. So I'm taking the position that this story is a masterful internal exploration of distraction and personal failure.
And I take the opposing view. I argue that the story is a sharp indictment of how a transactional mindset blinds us to intrinsic value until it is, institutionalized and monetized by the very systems that rule our lives.
To start us off, if we look at Jude's apartment in the story, it functions as what Day calls a museum of unfinished intentions.
Oh, I love that phrase.
It's so good. The text goes to great lengths to detail Jude's history, and it's not just a quick resume. He is a man digging hundreds of 10-foot wells, slowly dying of thirst because he never hits water.
He abandons everything.
Everything. He was a freelance copywriter, a karate instructor, a Japanese translator,
A podcaster, a painter.
the list goes on and on. So in my reading, Bounce is not some tragic victim of capitalism. The cat is a narrative mirror. Bounce forces Jude to realize that his poverty was never about a lack of resources or a rigged economic game. It was a chronic psychological inability to focus.
I see where you're going with that, but
Just to finish the thought, the story doesn't resolve when the bank returns the cat or when the financial system is overthrown. It resolves when Jude sits down, opens his laptop, ignores the allure of a shiny new hustle, and finally sticks to a single project.
okay, that resume of failures is definitely prominent, but I think focusing entirely on Jude's job history ignores the lens through which he actually views the world.
How so?
Well, the story is fundamentally about the profound alienation caused by seeing life as a purely monetized ledger. Look at what Jude actually does in the inciting incident. He doesn't just casually ignore his cat.
No, he pawns him.
Exactly. He treats a living, breathing companion as a literal financial asset to solve his red ink. He takes an emotional bond and turns it into a contract.
Well, a desperate contract, but yes.
And then we have the bank, led by the executive, Graves. Graves represents the ultimate institutional commodification. He sequesters this linguistic miracle in an office that the text explicitly describes as a surveillance tower.
Right, the glass office.
Yeah. The bank explodes its stock price, the shareholders become wealthy overnight, and they deny the rest of the world access to his sentience. They took a living creature and turned him into a proprietary data point.
I mean, that is the bank's function, sure.
It is a perfect metaphor for how systems capture intrinsic magic and lock it away for leverage.
I see the mechanics of that argument, especially with the bank's stock price soaring. But let's look at the actual interactions between Jude and Bounce, particularly when the secret is revealed.
Okay.
There is a profound moment that we really have to unpack. The meaning behind Bounce's silence. When Jude visits the bank, after the whole world knows Bounce can speak, the cat says absolutely nothing to him.
Not a word.
He doesn't condemn him. He doesn't offer some devastating speech about betrayal. He simply observes Jude, as the text says, the way someone might watch rain.
Which is chilling.
But I argue this silence is a neutral psychological mirror. It forces Jude to project his own insecurities, to shrink beneath his own guilt. Think of Jude like a prospector, walking right over a diamond mine because he's too busy frantically drawing a map for a hypothetical gold mine.
I'm not sure I buy the neutral mirror idea.
The cat's silence is the ultimate therapeutic tool. It gives Jude nothing to push back against.
But doesn't that frame the cat's silence as a calculated therapeutic choice rather than a tragic consequence?
I think it is calculated.
See, the silence isn't a mirror. It is the inevitable death of a commodified relationship. The text gives us Jude's internal monologue while he's watching the news in his apartment, eating those discount noodles.
Right, watching Bounce on the news.
Yeah. He realizes he had never even asked the cat, "How are you?" or "hungry." He only saw Bounce as a long-term project, just another item on his shelf of hobbies.
Exactly, a distraction.
But when you reduce a living companion to collateral, you destroy the very foundation of communication. That is the real tragedy here. The cat talks to linguists, to scientists, to the media, to other cats.
Sure, he's very chatty with everyone else.
He functions as a literal intermediary between species, but he has absolutely nothing to say to Jude. Why?
Because Jude needs to hear the silence.
No, because Jude voluntarily severed the social contract for a 3-month loan extension. Bounce isn't playing therapist. Bounce is demonstrating a very real consequence. When you treat a being as an object, they become an object to you.
I mean, I have to admit, when I first read that scene in the bank, I was fully expecting fireworks. I really thought the cat was going to lay into Jude.
It would have been totally justified.
It would have. And because it didn't happen, I struggled with the scene initially. But looking closely at the text, Jude explicitly notes that the gaze is not judgmental. The line is, not judged, not condemned, simply observed.
Still, the lack of judgment doesn't mean it's therapy.
But if Bounce was punishing him for treating him as an object, there would be hostility. There is just a blank stare. If the cat yells at him, Jude gets to play the victim of an angry pet. He gets to walk away feeling self-righteous.
By doing absolutely nothing, the cat forces Jude to confront those 20 unfinished plans spread across his desk.
The realization arrives quietly because the cat's silence clears the noise of Jude's constant distractions.
But you can't decouple that internal realization from the physical environment where it takes place. Look at where the silence happens.
In the bank?
Yes, inside an enormous room overlooking the city, lined with books, populated by quiet researchers, Bounce is a captive asset in a corporate ecosystem, which brings us to the role of the banker, Graves, and the institution itself.
Ah, Graves.
Graves is the one who initiates this transaction. During their initial mutual assessment, Graves instantly recognizes the cat's hidden value. He sees what Jude is entirely blind to.
Right, he spots the anomaly.
And what does the institution do once the secret is out? Graves doesn't share this extraordinary scientific and philosophical breakthrough with the world. He hoards it. The bank refuses all purchase offers.
Well, yeah, they want to keep the asset.
And if we look at the mechanics of how institutional monopoly works, it makes perfect sense. In a transactional worldview, scarcity is what creates value. If the cat talks to everyone on YouTube, the bank loses its leverage.
Sure.
By isolating the miracle, the investors celebrate, and the banker ends up on magazine covers. The story is outlining how institutional structures recognize value only to monopolize it for their own gain.
Look, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, obviously Graves is the villain here, I completely understand that impulse. I bought into that on my first read, too.
'Cause it's right there in the text.
It really isn't, though. The text simply doesn't support that reading in the climax. Think about Jude's return to the bank. If this were a straightforward critique of ruthless capitalism isolating miracles, Graves would block Jude's access.
Not necessarily.
He would. He would have lawyers, non-disclosure agreements, and security guards barring the door. But what actually happens? Graves welcomes him immediately.
He does let him in, yeah.
Jude asks, no legal obstacles? Graves says no. No security concerns? Graves says no. He smiles and tells Jude he is still your cat. The bank isn't the villain. The bank is merely a plot mechanism.
A plot mechanism?
Yes. They uses the bank as the only force powerful enough to separate Jude from his final distraction. The institution is remarkably accommodating because the conflict isn't between Jude and the bank. The conflict is between Jude and his own compulsion to abandon things.
I'll grant you that Graves is remarkably polite, but But have you considered the profound condescension in that accommodation?
Condescension?
Yes, he is still your cat. The words, as Jude notes, felt heavier than they should have. Graves isn't blocking Jude because Graves has already won. The bank has successfully extracted the systemic value of the cat.
They got what they wanted, sure.
They don't need to keep Jude away because the structural alienation is already complete. The institution can afford to be magnanimous because Jude willingly surrendered his miracle to them.
He needed the loan extension.
Right, and the bank turned a sentient being into a heavily guarded, heavily researched asset. The fact that Graves lets Jude visit doesn't absolve the bank. It highlights Jude's utter powerlessness. Jude is a tourist visiting his own life, a life he mortgaged away.
But that visit as a tourist is the exact catalyst for his psychological turnaround. If the bank is the villain, the triumphant ending of the story would be Jude extracting the cat from the surveillance tower.
Which he can't do.
He doesn't even try to do it. After the visit, Jude goes home and realizes the cat had never abandoned him. Jude abandoned things. He realizes that for years he searched desperately for the next opportunity while stepping over the ones he already possessed.
Right, the Museum of Unfinished Intentions again.
Exactly. He looks at his half-read books and unused gadgets. He understands the mechanics of his own failure, the dopamine hit of starting something new versus the painful slog of actually finishing it. The realization is entirely internal, and this is perfectly crystallized in the final note he receives a year later.
Oh, the photograph on the windowsill.
Yes. So, a year later, Jude is completely out of debt. His publication is growing steadily, which the text notes is a painful, unglamorous process. He receives a photograph of Bounce sitting on the bank's windowsill with a 7-word note on the back. You were never poor, only distracted.
It's a striking image.
It is. And I submit that this note is the definitive proof of the psychological thesis. Those 7 words cure Jude of his illusion. They validate that his financial poverty was merely a symptom of his fractured attention.
I think cure is a strong word.
But it is a cure. When he finally focuses on his writing and stops chasing the phantom of easy success, the poverty vanishes. The story is diagnosing a distinctly modern internal crisis, the paralysis of endless choice. We live in an era where we are constantly told we can be anything, and as a result, we often end up doing nothing. Jude's victory is escaping that cycle.
It is a powerful moment of self-reflection, absolutely. But I interpret that final note in almost the exact opposite way.
Really? How so?
You were never poor, only distracted. That is the ultimate tragedy of the transactional lens. Look at the broader context of those words. Jude had a literal miracle in his apartment for 2 years. A cat that we learn climbed 2 floors of scaffolding just to choose him as an owner.
Yeah, the backstory of how they met.
And what did Jude do with that miracle? He obsessed over red numbers, red warnings, red deadlines. His entire worldview was dictated by the ledger you mentioned at the very start of our discussion.
Well, he was broke.
Because he was so panicked about monetizing his time, he was blind to the intrinsic value, the sheer wonder of the being sitting right next to him washing its paw. He only realizes the cat's value when the rest of the world and the financial markets deem the cat priceless.
So you are reading the note not as a cure, but as an indictment of his blindness to the magic he already held?
Precisely. It is profoundly ironic. Jude gets his life together. He writes his publication. He pays off his debts. But where's the cat?
At the bank.
The cat is still at the bank. The photograph shows Bounce on a windowsill inside the institution. Jude has successfully assimilated into the functional economy, yes, but he has permanently lost the miracle.
I don't know if lost is the right word.
He did lose it. The story is warning us about the mechanics of this mindset. If we view our lives strictly as a ledger, as a series of assets and liabilities, we might achieve financial solvency, but we will lose our soul in the process. We fail to see the wonder of the beings around us until a banker puts a price tag on them. Jude fixed the numbers, but he lost the magic.
I mean, I completely see the melancholy in your reading, and it's a beautiful way to look at it. But I think viewing it as a tragedy underestimates the triumph of Jude's final state. Let's look at exactly how he reacts to that note.
Okay.
The text says, after reading the note, Jude stared at the sentence for a long time, then he laughed, then he cried a little, then he went back to work. The cat, after all, had already said everything worth saying.
Right, he goes back to work.
But there is a deep acceptance there. It is not a tragedy, it is an integration. Jude doesn't need to rescue Bounce because Bounce doesn't need rescuing. Bounce is reading books in a sunlit room, observing pigeons, seemingly content.
Content in a surveillance tower.
But Bounce served his purpose as the ultimate disruptor of Jude's dysfunction. And the note, which is heavily implied to be sent by Bounce himself, given the neat black ink and the cat's proven intelligence, is an absolution.
That is an interesting interpretation.
It gives Jude permission to stop chasing miracles and start doing the steady, painful work of living.
The idea that the cat actually wrote and sent the note is fascinating, and it certainly aligns with the magical realism of Dealey's world. If the cat has agency within that system, it adds a whole new layer.
Exactly.
But even if it is an absolution, we have to remember it is an absolution delivered from inside a corporate surveillance tower. I just cannot shake the institutional critique here. Let's look at Jude before the bank.
His museum phase.
Yeah. His life was dictated by creditors who sounded bored on the phone. His identity was fragmented by the relentless demands of a gig economy freelance researcher, social media personality, luxury real estate consultant.
All failed ventures.
But these aren't just random hobbies he chose for fun. They are the desperate flails of a man trying to survive under an economic system that demands constant hustle. The fact that his salvation requires sacrificing his only true companion to a financial institution is a very dark commentary on what the system requires of us just to achieve basic stability.
But that's exactly why the psychological reading is so empowering. It actively rejects the victimhood inherent in that systemic critique. Jude realizes that the system wasn't forcing him to fail. His own lack of discipline was.
I think it's a bit of both.
The text explicitly says stopping had never been the problem, stopping was his specialty. The gig economy is real, the pressure is real, yes, but Jude's failure within it was his own doing. When he finally commits to the old publication, not a new hustle, as the text emphasizes, he succeeds.
Because he assimilated?
No. If we blame the system entirely, Jude has no agency. Dezeki gives him agency by making him take ownership of his attention in an age where distraction is highly commodified.
Look, I certainly don't disagree that personal focus is a central theme. The moment Jude realizes he is a museum of unfinished intentions is undeniably resonant. But I would argue the story's enduring power comes from how masterfully it intertwines Jude's financial debts with his emotional deficits.
They are connected for sure.
They are two sides of the same coin. The reason he is so distracted is precisely because the modern world demands constant monetization. The reason he doesn't speak to his cat, the reason he ignores the miracle, is because the cat doesn't catch mice or pay rent.
Ah, utility.
Yes, he evaluates his pet purely on utility. Jude tells the cat in the opening pages, "You contribute nothing." Think about that phrasing. That is the voice of the market speaking through Jude.
And the cat's response, that blinking silence, is the rejection of that market utility.
Exactly. The cat refuses to participate in Jude's transactional game. He stays silent until Jude literally forces him into a collateral arrangement. It is only when the contract is signed and the cat is legally an asset that the cat's true value is exposed to the world.
Wow.
But by then, of course, it already belongs to the market.
You know, this is where we find a really compelling convergence. Both of our perspectives highlight the absolute brilliance of Deity's premise. The story uses a wildly imaginative, magical realist concept, a talking cat leveraged for a bank loan, to diagnose a very real, very grounded modern condition.
It really does.
We both agree that the story inextricably links Jude's financial reality with his psychological state. You can't untangle the two.
You really can't. Whether you view the primary antagonist as Jude's own fractured attention or the commodifying gaze of the financial system that turns everything into data, the outcome is exactly the same, a profound blindness to the reality of the present moment.
Stepping over diamonds.
Right. Jude was stepping over opportunities and literal miracles that were already in his possession.
Well, as we draw this discussion to a close, it is incredibly clear that Collateral Cat is a text that rewards multiple readings. To view it purely as a psychological fable about getting your act together is perhaps to miss the sharp teeth of its institutional critique and the way markets turn living connections into monetized assets.
And on the flip side, to view it only as a systemic critique of capitalism is to ignore the very real, very personal triumph of a man who finally learns how to quiet the noise, sit down, and finish what he started.
Day leaves us with a narrative that refuses easy categorization. There is so much more to explore in the nuances of Jude's past, the implications of Bounce's conversations with other species, and the exact nature of that mutual assessment between the cat and the banker.
Oh, I could do a whole hour just on the banker.
Seriously. But we will leave it to you, the listener, to weigh the evidence and draw your own conclusions.
We all have our own museums of unfinished intentions to examine.
We do. And perhaps it is time we look closely at how we measure value in our own lives. When we stare at the ledger of our daily existence, at the black ink of our accomplishments and the red ink of our failures, we must ask ourselves, are we truly lacking in resources, or are we simply too distracted to see the miracles sitting quietly right beside us? Thank you for joining us.